Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. This is Michelle Doyle, and our topic today is Equitable Services under Titles 2 and 3 of the Every Student Succeeds Act. Thanks so much for being here with me today. A couple of housekeeping things, if we could. First of all, if you have not already done so, please mute your built-in microphone on your computer or other device so we reduce any background noise during the webinar. Secondly, if you are reading this and have sound issues, just be sure to check your computer speakers. Sometimes they default to mute, and that usually can take care of your problem. This chat box on the right-hand side of your screen is what we'll use for questions. I'll do my best during the presentation to continue to check for questions and to answer them as best I can. And then I'll remind you of this at the end as well, but just want you to know that following today's webinar, there will be a copy of the presentation posted on www.capspdnow.com, along with follow-up tools for both Titles 2 and 3. And in about a week, if not sooner, there will also be a recording of this webinar. So with that, let's jump right into our topic for today. This is the second of 3 webinars in a series that is sponsored by the California Department of Education. We are covering 3 topic areas in this series. Title 1, which has already been completed, and the recording and slides for which are on the website that I just read to you. Titles 2 and 3 are today, and in November, we will do Title 4A. Each of these webinars covers program purpose, allowable use of funds, fiscal requirements, and the consultation process. As I mentioned, my name is Michelle Doyle. I'm the CEO of Michelle Doyle Educational Consulting, which was established in 2001. Prior to that, I was the Associate Director for Education in the Office of Government Liaison at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I served for nearly 10 years as the Director of the Office of Non-Public Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And I've also been an Assistant Superintendent of Schools, a Principal, a Director of Student Activities, and a teacher. And so I come to you today with that background. The goals for today are to provide you with, first of all, a basic understanding of Titles 2 and 3 of the Every Student Succeeds Act, particularly as those titles relate to equitable services for private school students. Secondly, to provide you with an understanding of the consultation process between public and private school officials. And then finally, as a reminder of follow-up, all of the webinars in the series will be recorded. So one of them is Title 1, and this one will be, and we'll follow in November with Title 4A. They're all recorded and posted on www.capspdnow.com. There will be 4 tools that will follow this webinar: fiscal data planning sheets for each program, and tools for determining educational need for each program. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, there will also be a copy of the slides that you're seeing today. And I'll just do a little shout out to Katie Ellis from CDE, who has welcomed all of you too. It's great to partner with Katie and Sylvia and all the staff at CDE, and I thank them for the opportunity to share some time with you today. The resources that I'm using in the slides that you'll see in the presentation that I'm making are, of course, the statute itself. So the ESSA statute sections 8501 to 8506 are referred to as the uniform provisions for the participation of private school children and teachers. And these are the provisions that apply to the programs that provide equitable participation under ESSA, except for Title 1. Title 1 has its own section in the law. I also have several pieces of non-regulatory guidance that I'm depending on, and these are issued by the U.S. Department of Education. The first is called ESSA Fiscal Changes and Equitable Service Guidance, which is from November 21, 2016. The second is Building Systems of Support for Excellent Teaching and Leading, which is from September 2016. And the third is English Learners and Title III of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as amended by ESSA, and that is from November 29th, 2016. Now, many of you have heard me present before, and so you have seen this piece on equitable participation. But I believe since we use the term so often, that it's important to just go over the elements that the U.S. Department of Education has listed as the elements of a program that provides equitable participation. First of all, the program spends an equal amount of funds to serve similar public and private school students, their teachers, and other educational personnel, taking into account their number and education needs. So we're looking at funding. Number two, provide services and benefits that are equitable in comparison to the services and benefits provided to public school students, teachers, and other educational personnel. So we're going to look at the kinds of benefits that come out of the program for public school students and the program for private school students. The program addresses and assesses the specific needs and educational progress of public and private school students, teachers, and educational personnel on a comparable basis. And you'll hear me say several times that it's the needs of the students that we're going to serve that really is the foundation for program design. Fourthly, provides in the aggregate approximately the same amount of services to public school students, teachers, and educational personnel as it provides to private school students, teachers, and educational personnel with similar needs. So we're going to look across the board to see that there's some evenness to the types of services. Number five, provides both groups equal opportunities to participate in program activities. So making them available on the same basis to whether it's the students or the teachers or the families between public and private school programs. Number six, provides private school students, their teachers, and other personnel with an opportunity to participate that provides reasonable promise of participating private school students meeting challenging academic standards. So of course we want a high quality program, and as educators, you know that to be true. And finally, provides different benefits and services to private school students, their teachers, and other educational personnel, provided to those to public school participants if their needs are different. So we have that as well. And as I say, I know many of you have heard those, but I think it's good just to do a review of exactly what we mean by that term, equitable participation or equitable services. So as we're using that in the particular context of Title II and Title III, we're all on that same page as to what that terminology means. It's also important to remind you that all of the programs that are funded with federal dollars administered by the public school district to benefit private school students must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological. They have no religious or spiritual basis. They're impartial, unbiased, unprejudiced, equitable, and they're not related to or based on specific ideas. So again, just a good reminder that those are the kinds of programs and services to private school students that we're talking about when we're looking at the equitable participation of private school students in federal education programs. So with that as way of background, let's start with Title IIA, which is the professional development title. And what I like to do is to look at any of these titles or the consultation process in two different pieces. I like to look at the funding piece, and then we'll talk about the services. So we can't really have one without the other. We need to know how the program is funded, the funds that are available, and then public and private school officials can together design an equitable program of services. So we look at that in a balanced way. The proportional share of funds that is allocated by the public school district to serve private school students under Title II is based on the relative number of children attending private schools that are located in the public school district versus all public and private school students in the district. So we're counting the students attending the private school that is located in the public school district, regardless of where the child resides or the child's family resides. And so this is a difference, a huge difference from Title I. Secondly, under ESSA, computing the proportional share under Title II is based on the total allocation after administrative costs are deducted, and not just the portion the public school district uses for professional development. So when we are talking Title IIA, there's a myriad of uses for Title IIA, but when you're talking about the private school equitable participation, we're really focusing on the professional development piece of this. So there is greater flexibility in the private school program, in the public school program, pardon me, and the focus is a little more narrow in the private school program, but the funding is based on a proportional share of the total funding received by the district for Title IIA minus administrative costs. Here is an example, and it is from the Ombudsman website in California, of how to calculate the proportional share under Title IIA. So what you can see here is in this example given by CDE, the Ombudsman website, we have the LEA enrollment of 900 in this example, and the participating nonprofit private school enrollment of 100, giving us a total enrollment in the district of 1,000 students. The total LEA allocation in this example is $1 million, and the administrative costs for administering both the public and the private school programs by the LEA is $50,000. That now leaves us with $950,000 for services under Title IIA. What we do then is we take this $950,000 and divide it by the total enrollment in line A3 in the chart on your slide, 1,000, leaving us the per pupil allocation of $950. Now, in this example, we have 100 private school children that have been counted. We're going to multiply that by $950 per student, and so the private school allocation is $95,000. So that's how the proportional share is calculated. It's really pretty simple in Title IIA, and in a sense, we don't really have to spend any more time on the funding piece. Once that chart can be completed in the consultation process, you're ready to start talking about the needs of your students, how to meet those needs, and what the program design will be. What you'll see in Title IIA under ESSA is a much more extensive use of the funds from previous Title II options. And those are the kinds of uses I'm going to go over very shortly. One of the kind of overall things to remember is that if reasonably available, whenever possible, the professional development that is being funded through the Title IIA federal program should be evidence-based. We'd like to know that it's going to be effective, because after all, the whole goal of Title IIA professional development is to make a difference in teaching and learning in the classroom. So we want it to be effective. And so if it's reasonably available, we want to use evidence-based professional development programs. And these programs are for teachers, instructional leadership teams, principals, other educational personnel, other school leaders. So we are in a way looking at the teaching force of the school in a rather holistic way. We're not only looking at teachers, but we're looking really at everyone who can impact teaching and learning in the classroom in the school itself. We want to be sure that we're meeting student needs. And if you'll recall, it's actually in two pieces of the equitable participation definition from the U.S. Department of Education, is that we're going to have the foundation of the program we're designing based on the particular needs of the students we're attempting to serve. So even though this is professional development for the teachers, we're looking to design the professional development program in a way that best meets the needs of the students. And then, if you recall, another element of equitable participation is that the program should really lead to success in the classroom. So not only to meet the needs, but to meet them well, to have a high quality program. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning in the list of resources, there was Title IIA guidance for ESSA issued in September 2016. And in that guidance, it encourages the strategic use of Title A funds for a greater impact on teaching and learning in the classroom. So when you read through that non-regulatory guidance from the U.S. Department of Education, it's really written from an educator point of view of looking at strategies that are going to assist teachers, not just personally, but assist them in conveying into their classroom better teaching and learning techniques. In the guidance, there's actually 6 elements of ways to support educators through the use of Title IIA funds. They are multiple pathways to teaching and learning, induction and mentorship, meaningful evaluation and support, strong teacher leadership, transformative school leadership, and supporting a diverse educator workforce. Now, I'm going to touch on each of these 6 elements, but what I've tried to do is to, in some sense, narrow them somewhat to be sure that they're appropriate for use with funds benefiting private school students. And I word that very carefully because whenever we use federal education program funds, the LEA is not doing that as a focus to support private schools. They are serving private school students. And so we always want to keep that distinction in mind, that we're always, our eye on the prize is always to help our students, and not the primary benefit being the school itself. So the primary beneficiary is always our students. So let's look at these 6 elements of Title IIA as outlined in the non-regulatory guidance for ESSA. The first is multiple pathways to teaching and learning. Here's one suggestion that's in the guidance: to develop and host school leader preparation academies, which can be SEA led and directed. And I'll talk a little bit about the SEA set aside for Title IIA in a moment. But developing school leadership is important, provided that in the content we are focusing on the needs of the students in doing so. Supporting teachers to ensure they have the necessary subject matter knowledge and teaching skills to best help students achieve. And you can see how that ties really directly into student needs. To provide principals and other school leaders opportunities to develop and implement instructional leadership skills to help teachers teach and help students learn. So in many ways, that's, again, a holistic way of looking at teaching and learning, is to be sure that there is leadership about teaching and learning so that it is a continual improvement for the students and a cognition of the needs of those students and how that translates into good teaching techniques in the classroom. The second element talked about in the guidance was induction and mentorship. And here are a couple of ideas that I thought were appropriate. Establish high-quality teacher induction and mentorship programs, evidence-based, of course, where possible, designed to improve classroom instruction and student learning and achievement. So working with our new teachers, providing coaching, providing mentors, to ensure that our classroom instruction is actually meeting the particular needs of the students. Secondly, to bring in community partners to provide expertise and continuity for induction programs and high-quality mentorship opportunities. And I find there's other mentions of community partners here, and I find that really interesting, and something to take heed of is when we're using federal funds, to provide programs that benefit students, whether it's in public or private schools, to be honest, utilizing what's already out there in our educational community or other community partners can be really important and can really leverage any limited federal dollars to have an even greater effect for our students. So you'll see that throughout ESSA is the recognition that community partners can be really helpful in using federal funds to best meet the needs of the students being served. Thirdly, meaningful evaluation and support. Improve educator evaluation and support systems based in part on evidence of student achievement and student growth, classroom observations, and timely feedback. And this is one of the big changes that I've noted from the No Child Left Behind Act, talking about professional development, to the Every Student Succeeds Act. There was, I want to say, about 13, 14 years in between the writing of those acts, and the use of data and using evidence in regard to student achievement, student growth, using feedback loops between principals and teachers and connecting that to student data is something that, honestly, we didn't do a lot of in the year 2001, and we do so much more of now. And there's really a recognition of that in the guidance as well. To work to continually improve instruction and provide opportunities for educators to grow and improve. And to involve educators and other stakeholders to approach evaluation and support holistically, ensuring a fair, valid, and reliable program which includes multiple measures. So it is dealing with the evaluation and support in a way that truly does involve teachers as part of the decision-making team. Which brings us then to number 4, strong teacher leadership. Title IIA can give teachers the opportunity to exercise increased responsibility and grow professionally while keeping effective teachers in the classroom. And those of you who've been in the trenches for a while, I'm sure do realize that so many times the only promotion, quote unquote, that teachers can get is to leave the teaching profession and to go into administration. And not that we don't want great administrators as well, but it often weeds out a lot of really good teachers in the classroom. So helping to give our teachers the opportunity to increase their responsibilities and grow professionally while not losing that valuable resource in our classrooms is really important. Supporting peer-led, evidence-based professional development. Encouraging participation in a community of learning opportunities and other professional development opportunities with diverse stakeholder groups. And that's many times where the use of technology can come in, distance learning for professional development, so to speak, to expand that community of learning opportunity to get more cross-pollination across diverse groups of teachers and other folks. Providing opportunities for teachers to learn from teacher leaders is another opportunity here. Number 5, transformative school leadership. Provide support to develop and improve strong school leadership in order to impact student learning and attract, develop, and support strong teachers. So once again, it's that focus of having really great teachers in the classroom and supporting them in their work in the classroom. And tying all of that to student learning is, of course, an essential piece of that. Developing opportunities for principals and other school leaders to collaborate, problem solve, and share best practices through community learning opportunities. And to assist individuals transitioning into positions in school leadership and support individuals new in the role of school leader through school leader academies, which ties into the very first option that was given of looking at school leadership academies. And then finally, supporting a diverse educator workforce. Provide ongoing professional development aimed at cultural competency and responsiveness. So I think what we see from all of these 6 elements that are in the guidance in looking at professional development under Title IIA is the focus on teaching and learning in the classroom. So we're always looking at student needs, meeting those needs, and making teaching in the classroom lead to the best options for learning for our students. Secondly, there's really an empowerment of teachers here, of recognizing that teachers are just such an important part of this whole equation, and Title IIA can really support their professionalism so that it translates to having great teachers to meet our student needs. And finally, that connection to the community, whether that's the educational community across a district, across a state, across the country, and involving other stakeholders, but recognizing that there's a lot of options out there for high quality professional development to meet the needs of the students being served. Now, the state education agency also has an option to use Title IIA funds. And in fact, this webinar is part of the use of those Title IIA funds that are benefiting private school leaders. At least 95% of the state's Title II funds are subgranted to the districts, and there's a small amount that the state can use for administration of the program, but then there's a small amount of funds, but when it's statewide, it can amount to a good dollar amount that the state can reserve for state-level activities. Now, the equitable service requirements and the consultation requirements that I'll provide to you following the Title III piece of this presentation apply to the use of funds that are set aside by the state for state-level activities. So the services should be designed in consultation with private school officials so that they're meeting the needs of the private school participants. Examples of state-level activities include promoting professional growth through counseling and mentoring, developing leadership, providing new teacher and principal induction and mentoring programs, providing high quality professional development for principals, and training teachers to effectively integrate technology and provide blended learning opportunities for their students. Those are just some examples. It's not the be all and end all, but just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that can happen on the state level with Title IIA funds. So with that, I'm going to now move into Title III, English Learners and Immigrant Students, and following that, I'll go through the consultation process as it relates to these two programs. So let's switch gears and talk about Title III for English Learners and Immigrant Students. I will cover the definitions of both of those terms, talk about how the funds, the proportional share of funds are determined, and then we'll talk about use of funds. So just like Title IIA, we're going to look at the funding piece and we're going to look at the service piece. The definition of English learners under Title III are the following. So it is an individual ages 3 through 21, enrolled or preparing to enroll in an elementary or secondary school, a person who was not born in the United States or whose native language is other than English, not Native American or Alaskan Native, who comes from an environment where a language other than English has had a significant impact on the individual's level of English language proficiency. And that actually really goes back to the third bullet as well, because that is not born in the US or whose native language is other than English. And here we look at the impact that a language other than English has had on the individual's level of English language proficiency. A student who is migratory, whose native language is a language other than English, and who comes from an environment where a language other than English is dominant. And finally, whose difficulties in speaking, reading, writing, or understanding English, so all the elements of the language arts, may be sufficient to deny the ability to meet challenging standards, successfully achieve in the classroom, or have the opportunity to fully participate in society. So that is our definition of English learners. Here is our definition of immigrant children and youth. A child ages 3 to 21, not born in any state, and have not been attending one or more schools in any one or more states for more than 3 full academic years. So the count of immigrant students, even though it could be a child not born in any state in the US, and that includes the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and Guam, But once they've attended school in the US for 3 full academic years, they're no longer considered an immigrant child or youth. And immigration status is not really a consideration regarding eligibility for services. We don't check the status of a person or how they came into the country. So Title III funding, whether we're looking at from the feds to the states to the district, is essentially the same method. So when the U.S. Department of Education grants funds to the state, those funds are determined based on the relative count of English learners and immigrant children and youth. So we have 2 different counts, those 2 groups of students who meet those definitions, in public and private schools in your state of California versus all the other states in the union. That's how California's funding is determined. Now, California is going to subgrant that money to the districts, to the LEAs. Again, those funds are determined based on the relative count of English learners and the count of immigrant children and youth in public and private schools in one district versus all the other districts in the state. So that's how the state is going to determine the amount of funds that the district receives. And then there is a proportional share of those district dollars that are going to serve English learners and immigrant children and youth attending private schools. And in a similar manner, then, we're going to look at the number of English learners and the number of immigrant children and youth attending private schools versus all English learners and immigrant children and youth attending public and private schools in the district. And just like I mentioned in Title IIA, the residence of the child is not considered. It is children who meet these definitions attending a private school located in that public school district. So location of the school, not residence of the child. This is again from the California Ombudsman webpage, a great, I think, really quick way to look at and understand the proportional share calculation, and a great thing to fill out together in consultation. And so I noticed there's a question, is an LEA required to take the immigrant dollars? LEAs are never required to take any federal dollars at all. They could refuse them. And I don't know the background of that question. I don't know if we have districts refusing them. And, you know, I don't have the law opened in front of me, but I think there's a threshold level on both the count of English learners and immigrant children that if the count is too low, the district doesn't qualify. And I'm not 100% on that. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100%, and I can't look that up right now. So that's also a reason why a particular district might not have English learner or immigrant funds. And if anybody from the state is on here and would like to answer that question, that's fine. Otherwise, I would be happy to get back to the group with the answer, with a better answer to that question for Michael. So let's look at this chart, Title III proportional share calculation. So this is really similar to the one we looked at in Title IIA. We look at the LEA's English language immigrant count. It is 100 in this example. And the private school count from nonprofit private schools is 10. So we have 110 students total that we're looking at here. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate it. Now we're going to look at the allocation. So the allocation for the district is $15,000. They're going to take 2% administrative costs to administer the public and private school programs. So that's $300. And now we have $14,700. We're going to then take that $14,700 and divide that by our 110 students. And now we have a per pupil allocation of $133.64. And we know we have 10 qualified private school students. So the private school in this example is generating $1,336. So that's the calculation. And again, filling this out together or having this filled out by the district and discussing it in consultation is just a really quick shortcut to understanding the proportional share calculation. And as I said, this is on the CDE website, and I'll also have a copy of that as one of the follow-up tools for you as well. Now, how do we use the funds that are generated by private school students that meet the definition of English learners and immigrant children and youth? Well, the funds can be used for student instructional services, student support services, professional development, parent and family activities, and coordination of services to connect families to resources. So let's look at each of those topic areas individually. And again, this is based on that Title III guidance from 2016. I think this was a September, but it's on the earlier slides. So let's look at student instructional services. What this means is it provides an opportunity to increase English language proficiency by providing effective language instruction education programs that meet the needs of English learners and demonstrate success in increasing English language proficiency and student academic achievement. So that's an absolute mouthful, but let's break that down a little bit if we could. So what we really always want to do with Title III when we're talking about our English learners is the goal here is to increase English language proficiency. The goal is not to teach students in their native language. We may be doing some of that, teaching them in their native language, but always the goal of the program is to increase English language proficiency. So we want to have an effective language instruction education program as part of what's happening with Title III. And hopefully it is a program that has demonstrated success in increasing English language proficiency and student academic achievement. Because in the end, we want these students to be able to learn in English. And so that's the focus that we're going to have in the program, as well as ensuring that they are learning, and so sometimes we're using their native language as well. So let's talk about language instruction. Language instruction education programs equals effective approaches and methods for language instruction. That's what that is. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it's capacity building. It's driven by data on the unique needs of English learners. The program should be based on rigorous, relevant research and examined through performance monitoring. Is it doing any good? Are our students increasing their English proficiency? So when you look at all of those elements together, that can really create a systemic approach. Instruction, oh wait, I see I have a question. So, and I know that I'll just point out that in the chat box, you have been provided with Title III contact at the State Department of Education. And so I would really recommend you reach out to Jeffrey to get any really particular specific questions answered in regard to that. But we do have a question, and it is about Title II. We did not qualify for Title II funds this year, but if we did, should we have reached out to private preschools in our LEAs to capture enrollment numbers, since the age of eligibility starts at 3? For private schools, though, it is private school students attending a nonprofit private elementary or secondary school. So we're only counting students for funding purposes for Title III. I see that. That makes more sense. We're only counting students for funding purposes that meet the state's definition of an elementary school. So generally speaking, your standalone preschools are not qualifying, and most of your, if you're like dealing with a K-8 private or pre-K-8 or like pre-K-4 to grade 8 private school, most of those preschool kids would not count. I'm never sure about the whole transitional kindergarten thing in California, but generally speaking across the nation, I would say preschool kids never count for funding purposes. So because they don't meet the state's definition of an elementary school. So that's always what we have to keep in mind, that although those children who may not attend any school at all might be eligible for services. It's not a private school issue, because for a private school student to be counted, they have to be attending a private school that meets the state definition of an elementary or secondary school. So I hope that that answers that question. So let's look at instructional activities as outlined in the guidance. Here are a few things I pulled for you that I thought were appropriate and can help to kind of flesh out what we mean by Title III services. So upgrading program objectives and effective instructional strategies. So kind of building your program. The second bullet is like that too, improving instructional programs. Remember on a couple of slides ago, there was that feedback loop in it, that we wanted to monitor the performance of the program to see if it was actually being effective. And so some of Title III, in addition to monitoring the program, can help to improve it if it isn't actually effective. Also providing tutorials or career tech education. And much of that is more focused on your high school students. And I think many times when we look at federal programs, so many of the examples are always directed just at the elementary age students. And I think it often leaves middle and high school teachers, principals, and other leaders saying, yeah, but what about the big kids? You know, what do we do for high school kids? And so I wanted to be sure that you saw that there are examples of that in the guidance, as well as looking at career technical education. There's other examples, preparing them for college, connecting with community resources to help them after graduation, and things like that. Student support services. Services that support identified students, particularly immigrant children and youth and their families, to effectively integrate into the school and the community. And I think that's just a really important piece when we're looking at immigrant families that we may be serving, is to help them to recognize resources that are out there, become a part of the community, understand the education system here in the United States, and as well as learn in the classroom. So there's a whole, again, I know I use that word a lot, but I see this in ESSA so much, is that we are holistically looking at our students. And that the goal of the services remains ensuring that children served under Title III increase language proficiency and achieve in their classrooms. Professional development activities are another option under Title III. Provide effective professional development to classroom teachers, principals, educational personnel, and so forth, to improve instruction, enhance ability of teachers to implement curricula, substantially increase subject matter knowledge. The services should be of sufficient intensity to be effective, which I know is a challenge when there's not a lot of dollars. But that's one of the things you discuss in consultation, is we want them to be as intense as possible. We want them as effective as possible, but we have a small amount of dollars. So how do we do that? Maybe leveraging community resources, maybe looking at a multi-year plan, maybe looking at certain grade level teachers. I don't know, there's a lot of different options, but that may be one of the discussions you will want to have in consultation. To assist teachers and other educational personnel in meeting certification and licensure requirements, and open to all teachers and principals, not just EL teachers, no matter how many or few EL students are taught. So not just a particular teacher that his or her only job is to teach English learners, but our classroom teachers who have those English learners in the classroom on a regular basis. So we have another question. One of the issues I've seen around Title III is the requirement that the PD activities not be one-off workshops. It's very hard to find a series of workshops. Thoughts, anyone? I'm going to let the group here answer if anybody has any good resources for that. And, you know, that's really true in Title IIA as well. We want things to be kind of systemic, to be sustained, so that in the end they do make a difference in teaching and learning. But that can be a challenge both in finding the content, as I think you're indicating here, Michael, and secondly, being able to afford that in a program that has a limited amount of dollars from a federal perspective like Title III does. So I'm going to open that chat box up and encourage anybody here who has some resources to go ahead and share some of those as well. That would be great. Thank you. Family activities, providing community participation programs, family literacy services, and parent and family outreach and training. So particularly in Title III, we look really closely at involving families. And finally, employing strategies that coordinate and align related programs. So I can't emphasize enough that for immigrant families, there are often many resources available, and leveraging those can be a great use of Title III funding. So with that, let's just do, and I know many of you have heard this before, let's do a quick review of the consultation process so that we can put what we've just talked about, how the funding is determined, and the kinds of services that can be provided to private school students under Titles II and III, and link that into the consultation process as well. So as a private school official participating in the consultation process, you'll want to consult with your teachers, parents, other educational personnel. And if you're a regional leader representing multiple private schools, you'll want to talk to the principals so that you're going to the consultation meeting with a lot of background. You want to review standardized test scores, in-classroom assessments, report card grades, because remember, the primary thing you're going to want to talk about are the needs of your students. Survey teachers and parents to help evaluate current and past services is what we've been doing in this program effective. Are there better things we could do? Review the progress of special populations too, like English learners, gifted students, special needs students, so that you know you're looking at the broad range of students in the classrooms that you hope to serve. In a question and answer in November 2016 guidance, they define a private school official or a representative of private school students. And I thought I would just take a minute to talk about that because, again, we say consultation between public and private school officials. What is that? Who is that? So often this is the principal or the headmaster of a private school, but at times the principal or the headmaster may designate someone else to participate in the consultation process on behalf of the students and teachers at the private school. So it could be somebody from the Builders of Jewish Education. It could be somebody from the Catholic Archdiocese. Somebody in a role like that might represent multiple schools to the district. In the case where a group of private school officials seeks to be represented by a single central office administrator, that administrator should inform in writing the LEA superintendent that this is the person as the designated primary contact and give the contact information so that everybody's on the same page from the beginning. And then that administrator should provide the list of private schools that he or she represents so that you don't have that miscommunication and deadlines are missed or information is not provided because the email's been going to the wrong person. So it's just good to be sure that everybody's on the same page at the beginning. Now, private school officials, and this comes actually from some older guidance, but it's still appropriate today, that although ESSA doesn't include any actual requirements for private school officials, you know, the only way to actually have timely and meaningful consultation is for private school officials to actively participate in the consultation meetings. And what does this mean to actively participate in that? Well, it gives the private school official the opportunity to provide input in the development of a timeline for consultation. When are the meetings going to be? What are we going to talk about in those meetings? Certainly, to provide data and information about the needs of their students and teachers. That's first and foremost needed to have an intelligent discussion about program design, and to offer suggestions regarding program design, implementation, and evaluation. And while this is the public school district's program, and they'll be making the final decisions about program design and implementation and evaluation, they do so after timely and meaningful consultation. So it's important to actively engage in that process. To inquire about participation in any discretionary grant program. So just to be sure that, you know, we always look at the big four programs, but there's other smaller programs that maybe your district as a private school official is participating in. So it's an open forum. To address the use of third-party providers if appropriate, and to complete any appropriate forms needed by the district to ensure the delivery of equitable services. So The district, of course, should not be overburdening private school officials with paperwork, but there are some things that are going to be needed to complete in writing for LEA purposes, and again, to be sure that the program design is equitable and carried out in a way that is true to the consultation process. We have guidance from April 2019 that says one of the things to do is to provide information to identify private school students who generate funds for equitable services. So whether they meet the definitions in Title III or they're simply attending the private school under Title II, we want to get that count correct. And then any private school students who are eligible for services, which that really applies to Title III rather than Title II. So let's look at, again, we'll do funding and services. We're going to look at the funding issues. These are the required consultation topics that have to do with funding. So the public school district and private school officials should discuss in the consultation process the size and scope of equitable services to be provided to eligible private school students, teachers, and other educational personnel, the proportion of funds allocated for those services, and how the proportional amount of funds is determined. And I would just refer you again to the Ombudsman page, because what they've given you is the perfect tool to be able to sit together as public and private school officials and just fill in all of those blanks. And now you know the funding that was allocated and how it was determined. And so now you know the size and scope of the program. Whether to provide equitable services to eligible students by creating a pool or pools of funds from the proportionate share. And so this is whether we're going to go on a school-by-school basis. So St. Peter's School generated $10,000, St. John's School $15,000. So is each of those schools going to receive services in that amount, or are we going to provide services to the two schools together in the amount of $25,000? That's a basic explanation of a pool or multiple pools within the district, but that needs to be discussed in consultation. The method or sources of data that are used to determine the number of low-income families participating in Title I attendance areas. We're not talking about Title I today, but you're going to see that if you looked at the law and the guidance, it's going to list that as a consultation topic. Whether to consolidate and use the funds provided in coordination with eligible funds available for services to private school students under applicable programs. So in an example, a quick example of that, are we going to use Title IIA professional development services to focus only on our Title I students? If we did that, we'd kind of be extending the Title I program by using our professional development opportunities under Title IIA to focus on the needs of just our Title I students. So that's kind of what that means there. But just keep in mind that the district makes the final decision following consultation on all the topics. Now let's look at the second set of consultation topics, designing effective programs. How the needs of the students will be identified, first and foremost. What services will be offered? How, where, and by whom the services will be provided. How the services will be assessed and how the results of the assessment will be used to improve those services. How and when the LEA will make decisions about delivery of services, including a thorough consideration and analysis of the views of the private school officials on the provision of services through a contract with potential third-party providers. So it's not the end of the list, but it's definitely setting the stage. So we're looking at the needs, the services, who's going to provide the services, how we'll assess them, when decisions will be made, and whether or not we'll use a third party. If the district disagrees with the views of the private school officials on the provision of services through a third-party contract, the district provides in writing to these private school officials an analysis of the reasons why the district has chosen not to use a contractor. Similarly, whether the district will provide services directly or through a separate government agency, consortium, or entity. So looking at something like in Pennsylvania, they have something called intermediate units or education commissions in New Jersey. Some states have these quasi-government or semi-government agencies, and they can be treated like a third party is what that means there. including the approximate time of day services will be provided. And while we think of that mostly in Title I, it's important when you're talking about any student services or even about professional development, because it goes back to that opportunity to participate that's required as part of equitable participation that we covered in the very beginning. And then on these topics as well, the district is going to have the final decision following timely and meaningful consultation. A few reminders. The goal of consultation, and this should be the goal for both public and private school officials, is to reach agreement on all the required topics. Secondly, everyone should be given a genuine opportunity to express their views during consultation and to have their views seriously considered. So this shouldn't just be a meeting where the district tells the private school officials what the program will look like, or that the district kind of just nods and smiles and then does what they intended to do anyway. And it's also not a time where private school officials basically dictate what the program looks like. That instead, this is public and private school officials exercising a real opportunity to express their views and to have those views seriously considered. So it's that give and take, it's actual communication. And I think that's important to keep in mind, and it's what will enhance reaching that goal of agreement in consultation. Public school officials may not make any decision that affects equitable participation prior to timely and meaningful consultation. And then, as I've said in the beginning, or throughout really, the primary benefit is to the student in meeting his or her needs, not to the particular teacher, not to the school, all right? And certainly the teacher benefits. Certainly in the end, the private school will probably benefit, but the focus, the primary benefit, is always tied to the needs of the students. So I'm going to make a couple of announcements here about what is next. And in the last few minutes we have, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat box and I'll answer those before we close off today. So first of all, thank you for attending, and thanks very much to CDE for having me share this hour with you today. There will be a recording of this webinar, and there already is a recording of the previous webinar on Title I on the website that is www.capspdnow.com. There's also a PowerPoint presentation from the full day workshops that I conducted in September in person in California. So either if you were there and wanted to review that PowerPoint, or if you did not make any of those in-person full day workshops, but would like to look at the training that was provided there, that is on that same website. And the final webinar in this series is going to be November 14th, and that is going to be on Title 4A. I see I have a typo here. It's 3:30 to 4:30. You don't want to spend 2 hours with me on a webinar. It is 3:30 Pacific Time, California, and it will be 1 hour in length. If you have not already registered, you can do it at that website. I do hope you will join in. So just to note that Katie from CDE, Katie Ellis, has noted that she's going to send an email through the listserv when this webinar is posted. And Paul has the website for the previous webinar in the chat box. So I'll leave that up for a moment for you to take a look at that or make a note of it as well. And with that, I just want to thank everybody so much. It is a pleasure to be here. All of you in California, please stay safe with the fires that are spreading a bit again. Know that you're in my thoughts and prayers. Everyone stay safe, and I hope you will join me in November. Thank you so much.